I knew day in and day out I was the best wrestler alive today. Woo! I've got the style and profile like never before.
The Ric Flair Show.
Woo!
The world heavyweight champion, Nature Boy Ric Flair.
Woo!
The 16-time world champion back behind the mic and telling it like it is.
If you're not carrying the big gold, you're second best no matter what you tell yourself.
And now, Ric Flair and Conrad Thompson.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to The Ric Flair Show. And today we've got something a little different for you on The Ric Flair Show. Here's something to wrestle with. Bruce Prichard. Bruce, you're here with us today. What's going on, man? How are you?
All right, man. Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. A little bit different, doing something on a Wednesday.
It is a little different on a Wednesday. This is The Ric Flair Show right here on the MLW Radio Network. You can find this anywhere you find your traditional podcasts, of course. Throw us a subscribe on iTunes, but you can catch us on pretty much every other platform there is. And, of course, RicFlairShow.com. Conspicuous by his absence today, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. He couldn't be with us today, Bruce.
Woo!
I guess that'll count.
That close enough?
Yeah, so here's what we're going to do today. Rick is busy shooting a commercial today, and we still want to deliver a podcast to you on our usual Wednesday night, 9 o'clock time. Look for Rick this Friday on the Dan Le Batard Show. That's on ESPN. You want to check that out. It'll be Friday morning, and that is on November 18th. And he's shooting a commercial today. So while he's out, what Bruce and I are going to do is we're going to have an entire show devoted to the Nature Boy Ric Flair for this week's episode of the Ric Flair Show. So something a little different, but where could they hear you and I normally, Bruce?
Well, right here on the MLW Radio Network. It's called Something to Wrestle With, Bruce Prichard. There's not a long pause there, folks. Even though my co-host, or actually my host, I'm just a permanent guest, Conrad Thompson, likes to leave a long pause there, by God, but it's every Friday at noon right here on the MLW Radio Network, and you can download it on the same platforms, and give us a listen and give us a try. Appreciate it.
So here's the recap. We're going to do the traditional format for this week's episode of the Ric Flair Show, but one of the things that we're going to do right in the middle is instead of having an interview segment, it's just going to be Bruce and I talking about Ric Flair stories. Did Ric Flair almost come to the WWF in the 80s? When he finally did come in, what did Bruce think of that? He was there for part of that run initially, and then, of course, when Rick returned, a lot of people remember he came back and was actually in a match with Vince McMahon at the Royal Rumble in '92. Bruce was around for the Evolution. Bruce was there for the retirement. So we're going to get in-depth on all things Ric Flair on this week's edition of the Ric Flair Show. And if you want more Bruce Prichard, check him out Friday on Something to Wrestle With. Let's get to it, man, right now. The Figure 4 top story is brought to you by Flair Flame 2016. The votes have all been tallied. We have a new president-elect, but we can still make America woo again. So support Ric Flair and Waka Flocka Flame's bid for the presidency. It's not too late. And grab your swag to represent the dirtiest nominee that was on the ballot, Flair Flame 2016.
It is kind of late.
Well,
but,
we're getting ready.
But they can still show their support.
They can show their support. If you were happy with the results or you weren't happy with the results, I think we can all agree it would have been a fun ride had Ric Flair won that office. Don't you think, Bruce?
It would have been a little bit different, but I think no matter what happened, by God, we were going to get different, and we got different.
That Oval Office would have seen a lot more action even than it did with Bill Clinton there. Check it out, FlairFlame2016.com. All right, let's get into it, Bruce. Top story number 1. Chris Jericho recently got into an altercation with Sin Cara over on the European tour. And Bruce, this was like a few months back. Sin Cara had an incident with one of the vaudevillains, and Jericho had issues with Goldberg and Lesnar in the past. So this is something that, kind of seemingly follows these guys around. Have you heard anything about this, and how common was this stuff that you remember? It seems like it was probably more likely to happen on like a long European tour when everybody's on a bus together and stuff like that. What do you remember about scraps back in your day?
Well, it happens because, and the reason that it usually happens overseas is because you're in confined spaces for longer periods of time with guys that you may not ordinarily be around.
Right.
So tensions, they rise, and people tend to get on each other's nerves a lot more. You add into that, you're in a foreign country, sometimes where they don't speak the language, the food is different, your time clock is off, the beds are different, the hotels are different. and everybody's a little bit more on edge. So, it happens. It just happens.
Do you remember another situation like this on a European tour between two guys that you can give us?
Oh, I think there's probably something on every overseas tour.
You got a funny one?
Somebody.
Can you share a funny one?
It's just strange things happen. Let me put it like that. Michael Hayes got a haircut on a European plane trip one time back. And it's just a culmination of, again, everybody being around each other. They're letting off a little steam on the way back. Ribs happen. That's not a rib. Things happen, and it's just different. It's.
Was it in Europe when somebody did a number 2 in Sonny's Food?
It was. It definitely was. It was in Europe where someone did a number 2 in Mark Henry's Food. There are situations like Marty Jannetty. Overseas, and Marty's dad was ill at the time. Marty couldn't get a phone call through to the States to check on his dad. And so Marty had been up. He's really worried. His dad was not feeling well. His dad was in a bad way in the States. Marty's thousands and thousands of miles away, an ocean away, and he can't communicate with the front desk clerk. He can't, communicate with his dad, and he was emotional. He was tired, and things happened, man. He snapped. And you go back to the Coco Beware and Jim Troy fight.
What did happen? What happened? When did
he went down and was trying to get the front desk clerk to put his call through. The front desk clerk, I believe they were in France at the time. Not sure the
what did he do?
Town. He pulled the desk clerk across the counter, and thank God, people heard the commotion and got there before Marty did any kind of damage. But in the same night, same tour, Coco Beware and Jim Troy, who was an employee for the WWF at the time, got into a big fight in the hotel lobby and just tore the lobby up.
What were they fighting about?
They were fighting about they had all been out to dinner, and everybody had a lot to drink. And
so nobody really remembers, just guys being an asshole.
Guys being assholes, yeah.
Okay.
And getting out of line. I think Coco felt disrespected, and Coco Beware is one tough guy.
A minute ago, we talked about people doing a number 2 in the Food. We got old-time listeners here on the Ric Flair show.
That's poo-poo.
We're not talking about Mr. Wrestling number 2.
No, we're talking about poo-poo.
So do you know who was delivering those poo-poo platters?
I don't.
Okay, let's get top story number 2. This is not poo-poo, but it is boo-hoo, I guess. Dave Lagana is no longer with TNA. Longtime WWE writer and seen as a big asset to TNA for, I guess, years now. And apparently when all this Dixie versus Billy stuff happened, he sided with Billy. So this was seemingly just a matter of time if Billy lost control, whatever that means, of TNA. Dave went on to write a piece online saying he was moving on from wrestling. What are your memories of working with Lagana?
I worked with Dave since Dave was, I believe he was a writer's assistant. I'll probably get a phone call from him correcting me on that in WWE. But Dave is a hard-working guy, a creative guy, and bust his ass wherever he was. I worked with Dave both at WWE and also at TNA. And I got a little bit of a scoop on this because I spoke to Dave after he resigned. And he's, as he said, he's moving on. He's doing other projects and sounded really happy. But for a long time, apparently, the creative team of Lagana and Matt Conway hadn't even been in the office in TNA. They'd been working out of their homes and kind of ostracized from the rest of the office, if you will, at TNA. And I guess that when everything blew up with Billy Corrigan and TNA and their owners or whatever the hell's going on down there, no one will ever really know the true story of everything going on there. But they were out of the office, and Dave felt that it was time to move on. He was tired of the bullshit and time to move on.
Top story number 3. Let's move on there. Joey Styles made news again this week after being fired from Evolve. Apparently, management told Joey not to do anything political on the show, and he made a reference to Trump's grab them by the blank comment. in regards to women. So Joey was fired publicly from this promotion, and then a few other promotions followed suit. And a lot of people online, Bruce, are deeply offended, and Joey has gone on to issue an apology. Did you work much with Joey, and what's your experience been like working with Joey over the years?
I did work with Joey, and I always found Joey to be one of the most respectful people I've ever had the pleasure of knowing. He was very good at his job. Another guy who worked tirelessly. He worked tirelessly for ECW and Paul Heyman prior to coming to the WWE, and I don't know what happened with WWE, why he left. But here's a guy who loves the business and who would give everything he's got for anybody that he worked for. Hell, I'd hire him in a heartbeat. But we're gonna cover this. We're gonna cover this on Something to Wrestle with Bruce Prichard this Friday. I'm gonna get a little bit more in detail on it there, but or maybe I should do it here. I don't know. But you know what? The chicken that fired him. Can I say that on this show? Or
Yeah,
is this one of those?
Rick has made it famous where we have a beep button for some stuff, and I think Rick would want us to invoke a beep there. But you can kind of use your imagination as to what Bruce is getting at there. Joey Styles is obviously at the center of controversy, and I imagine that we'll hear more about him. Also at the center of controversy of late, top story number 4, Hulk Hogan's bank account has hulked up. Gawker has finally made a settlement with Hogan, and he was awarded $31 million. And, of course, that's before paying his attorneys, taxes, or whatever else will come out of that number. Bruce, did you see this coming, that Hogan would have a big financial windfall to the tune of $31 million here? And now that that's kind of all behind him, so to speak, or as much as it can be, do you think there's a chance he's back in the WWE by WrestleMania?
Well, working backwards, yes. I think there's a chance that we will see Hulk Hogan back. Maybe not at WrestleMania. I hope so. Hulk, that's where Hulk needs to be. And I am happy that he got a nice windfall. And, good for him. It's about time that one of the good guys win.
Great for him. Friend of the show, super supportive of this decision. Not so supportive this week. Top story number 5. We normally only do 4, Bruce, but this is the Ric Flair show, and this is what a lot of people wanted to hear about this week. Vader has made the news. He tweeted pictures of himself in a car all banged up after a wreck. A few days later, he got pretty upset with Rick and I about promoting our WCW World Title giveaway on Twitter. In that tweet, we made mention of their famous Starrcade 1993 match, which is one of my all-time favorite matches. He went on to tweet some nasty things about Rick, and eventually we should go ahead and just put all this to bed. Rick and Vader did tweet back and forth, and then later Vader would go on to tweet all the texts that they had shared privately, and eventually they spoke. So now that they have spoken, Rick and Vader are in a good place. Everything's patched up. Mick Foley was trying to be helpful and kind of play peacemaker in that process too, but everything is now back to normal. No one is upset. Unfortunately, Vader went on to tweet that he has congestive heart failure and that the doctors thought he may only have 2 years left to live. So now Foley is campaigning online to get Vader into the 2017 Hall of Fame, and I would love to see that happen. Longtime Vader fan, huge fan of his work. Loved him in WCW, not so much in the WWF. But Rick and Vader are okay now. So if you were tuning in today, hoping to hear a burial of Big Van Vader, that is not going to happen. And we're actually going to be talking about Vader later this week.
On Something to Wrestle with Bruce Prichard, we're going to cover his time in the WWE and get in depth with what some people called, a lackluster time. But I thought Leon had some good times in there as well. And I'm sorry to hear about his diagnosis, but, I'll get on my soapbox here and say that, I had a doctor in 2001 give someone in my family a 4-year death sentence and said, best case scenario, 4 years. That was 15 years ago, and they're still kicking and doing well. And as you know, I recently went through some health issues myself, and I go back to the first heart attack I had in 2012, where they told me if I didn't change my life and my my habits, that I wasn't long for this world as well. I did for a while, and then I regressed and went back into not the healthiest of living, and I went and had another heart attack in May. And this doctor was a lot more blunt, basically gave me the same kind of prognosis. So I hope that this is simply a situation where a doctor's telling Leon, hey, make some changes in your life, take care of yourself. You only got one heart, take care of it, and this is a worst-case scenario. That's what I'm hoping is the case, and I hope that Leon does take care of himself and gets healthy and beats this damn thing, because these doctors act like God sometimes and will give you the worst-case scenario and horrible news. It's almost like they relish it. But Leon's the kind of guy who's always been a fighter, and I hope he fights this and kicks its ass.
We do too. We're big Vader fans, or, me and my friends are in my circle. We really, really appreciate all of his work, and he is worth checking out on the network. He's on Twitter as well, if you'd like to keep up with his medical condition. It's at It's Vader Time on Twitter. And we're going to go to break. And when we go to break, we've got a big announcement to make about our WCW World Title Belt giveaway. We're going to give that belt away and then start talking all things Nature Boy on a very special edition of the Ric Flair Show. We'll be right back. All right, Rick's out shooting a commercial today, but he is going to be back styling and profiling to finish November strong, and you can still get your chance to see the Nature Boy live and in public, if you will. I'm talking to you, Chicago. He's coming your way this weekend, November 18th and 19th, Friday and Saturday. Check him out. It's Days of the Dead. The Dead invade Chicago. And you can find all the details about that. Just throw it in your Google machine. Days of the Dead, November 18th, November 19th. That's this weekend, Friday and Saturday. Next weekend, he's not taking Thanksgiving weekend off. No, sir. He's going to be at WrestleCade at the Benton Convention Center right there in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. That's on Saturday, November 26th, WrestleCade 2016. Don't miss it. He's back in Flair Country, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Where can you catch the Nature Boy come December and the rest of the year? Well, check him out on Facebook. He's got an events tab right there on his Facebook that's going to keep you up to date of everywhere the champ's going. When he comes styling and profiling to your town, you don't want to miss it. Now back to more Ric Flair Show.
If you want to be the man, you got to beat the man. Woo!
Don't miss a minute of the Ric Flair Show. Subscribe on iTunes now.
In Ric Flair, who you're looking at, the man. Woo!
Woo! The Ric Flair Show.
With an erection that is so rigid, you can strike matches on it.
And now, more Ric Flair.
So now we're going to do something a little different here, Bruce. You've never been a part of one of these giveaways, but we've kind of made these things famous here on the Ric Flair Show. So far, we've given away a copy of his NWA World Title, like the original Dome Globe design that Harley Race and Dusty Rhodes and Terry Funk wore. We also gave away a copy of the Big Gold Belt that everybody held, or so it would seem. The Bret Harts, the Goldbergs, the Hulk Hogans, the Macho Mans, everybody who's anybody held the Big Gold Belt. We even gave away a replica robe. It was pink, it had white feathers, it was awesome. And now we're giving away a copy of the WCW World Title that was made famous by Vader in matches against Ric Flair at Starrcade 93 when he lost it to Ron Simmons to create the first ever Black World Champion. Sting also held that belt, and he also beat Vader for it. Not picking on Vader, just saying Vader made this belt. I mean, this is very much the Vader belt.
To lose it twice, you got to win it twice.
Well, he hit him multiple times, and it was because of this situation where he was the man in WCW, and that ultimately got him signed with the WWF. So it's kind of the title that Vader made. But the first guy to hold it, I believe, was Lex Luger. And now what we've had to do here is get Rick to autograph a version of this belt. It's a replica version that's really hard to find, and if you could find it, it's hundreds of dollars. But then when you get Rick to sign it in a bold blue Sharpie, well, now it's something special, and that's what we're giving away here. All we had you do was go ahead and subscribe to the show and leave a 5-star review, and then post that review online using hashtag Ric Flair Show. And we had to use the hashtag because we wanted to be able to search all the entries. So be sure to remember to use that hashtag the next time we have a contest here for you. But let's give this belt away now with no further ado. The new world champion of the Ric Flair Show is at Superstar 500. Superstar, you are the new WCW world champion. go ahead and send me a message on Twitter. I am at Hey It's Conrad. Let me get your address, and we will get this belt headed your way right now. The only way to win these contests is to subscribe to the show. We don't do these for an extended period of time. It's usually just a week or two, and this time you only had a week. But congratulations, Mr. Superstar. And now let's get on to all things Ric Flair on this very special edition of the Ric Flair Show. Rick is away, so it's just Bruce Prichard and I, and you can hear us normally on Fridays, something to wrestle with, if you're into that kind of thing. But Bruce, you were there in the very beginning of what I would call kind of the golden era of wrestling, at least from my perspective. I wasn't really watching prior to WrestleMania 3. WrestleMania 4 was my first WrestleMania, and that's what I grew up on, so that's what I was always holding near and dear to me. But there was lots of talk back in the day that you guys were in deep negotiations to bring Rick over to the World Wrestling Federation, even in the late 80s. What did that look like? What happened? What's real? What's not real?
Well, come about 1988, the first SummerSlam, there were some negotiations going on, and Rick had expressed interest in coming to the WWF, and he had gone back and forth with Vince. It was yes, it was no, it was yes, it was no. And originally, Rick was going to be the special guest of Brother Love for Brother Love's first ever pay-per-view at SummerSlam.
Wow.
And so it was near and dear to me. I looked at that as kind of a cool deal to be able to introduce Ric Flair to the WWF family. It fell through. We also tried to get Jessica Hahn for that spot, she was hot in the news at the time.
Absolutely.
And we ended up with Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and Duggan and I had a lot of fun in that spot. But it was one of those deals where they had gone back and forth, and Rick was working with Jim Crockett Promotions out of Charlotte, and just kind of fell through. Rick stayed where he was.
Yeah, so who wound up doing that Brother Love show with you instead?
Hacksaw Duggan.
Cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It's always a lot of fun when Hacksaw Jim Duggan has a 2x4 in his hand. He's swinging at you because he's blind as a bat.
Was that part of your negotiations? I mean, were you part of the negotiations to bring Rick over?
No, I wasn't at that time. I was mainly doing television for WWE and the Brother Love gig. So,
what do you know? What the gist of those conversations between Rick and Vince would have been? Would they have discussed positioning on a card? I mean, would he have said, "We're going to bring you in and make you a top guy," or "We're going to give you a run with the world title," or "We want to put you in a feud with Hogan"? Or do you have any idea?
I'm sure Vince would always keep those negotiations fairly vague. I'm going to give you an opportunity. He sees potential, obviously, in someone like Ric Flair. He was the top guy for so many years for the NWA. And I think Vince looked at it as, here's an opportunity to get one of their top guys, bring him in, and make him one of our top guys. So Vince would always talk about opportunity, and here's an opportunity to come in and do something with the WWF and be a bigger star than you've ever experienced before.
And he would even be that vague with a guy in the position of Ric Flair at that time.
Sure.
Okay.
I go back to Ted DiBiase and the $1 Million Man. Vince would not tell Ted what the $1 Million Man gimmick was until Ted committed to come in. So he had an idea. I see big things for you. Think you'd be great. But I'm not sharing it with you until I know you're with me.
Did you all know that the $1 Million Man gimmick was going to be money?
There was, yeah. I mean, it was a great gimmick, and there was a viewpoint. Some say, and since I wasn't there when I came in, I'm the one that brought Ted to Vince. Ted and I were good friends. He laid out the gimmick to me, and when I said Ted DiBiase, said I've got a gimmick for him, it'd be great. He had this box in the corner of his office. It was called Box of Gimmicks, and but anyway,
how much of that character do you think is somewhat loosely based on some of Rick's old promos? Because Rick was one of the first guys to come out and talk about.
Well, that's where I was going. A lot of people think that that it was going to be Rick. A lot of people felt that it should have been Rick. And who knows? It might have been. But as time goes on, anybody that knows and spent any time around Vince McMahon, he was the real $1 Million Man, and he lived that gimmick.
No, I don't doubt that it was.
But Rick would have been great.
But it had to be at least loosely inspired. I mean, Rick at that point had been on TV for years saying, "I live in the big house, the big side of town, Rolex wearing, diamond ring wearing, got a Rolls Royce, got a high dive, blah, blah, blah." Without
a doubt. Rick would have been a great $1 Million Man. Because he was.
Yeah, he was. And he still is today. I mean, he's still living the gimmick. So let's fast forward, I guess, on all things Ric Flair. July of 1991, things come to a head. The Great American Bash happens, and Rick is not there. So he, in short order, signs with the WWF the very next month after falling out with Jim Herd. So he signs in August of 91, and you had been on a little bit of vacation at that point. Is that right?
That is, I was on hiatus.
Okay.
Vince used to like to call that hiatus.
So
you weren't fired, pal. You're just on hiatus.
With no check.
Part of the time, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So you actually come back to the company right after SummerSlam in 92, which would have been the Wembley Stadium SummerSlam that so many people are so fond of. Do you know, I mean, have you ever heard one way or another, because, Rick has given his answer on the show before, why wasn't Rick involved in SummerSlam 92? Do you know?
I don't know.
I mean, he was involved, but he wasn't booked in a match. There's 80,000 people there, and Rick's not in the match.
Right. It was that was Savage and Warrior,
right,
for the championship, and it was one of those deals where I guess they planned on making the switch to Rick at some point, but they still had to get Savage Warrior out of the way. That's about I'm guessing. I'm strictly guessing at that point.
So let's talk about the next pay-per-view, the next big thing that you're there for in Survivor Series 1992, which was Razor Ramon tagging with Ric Flair against the Ultimate Warrior and Macho Man. Now, this wasn't the original plan, right?
No, that was wait a minute. No, that was the original plan. That didn't take place. That actually ended up being Mr. Perfect. And Randy Savage against Rick and Razor.
But I mean, as far as I wanted you to kind of carry me through the Warrior situation.
Well, Warrior just had his issues back then and kind of left abruptly.
Is this viewed as, because Perfect and Perfect and Flair had been kind of paired at the hip for a lot of his run. Is this viewed as a negative to Rick that the Warrior's out of the match so it doesn't seem as high profile? Or is it a positive because now he doesn't have to work with him and he gets to work with his buddy?
I think Rick probably looked at it as a positive from the standpoint of not having to work with the Warrior in a match. I think the worst matches Ric Flair ever had in his career were with the Ultimate Warrior.
He would say so.
So to be able to work with Perfect and Perfect coming back after a long absence in the ring, it was a plus. It was a plus. And one of those things that if you're going to replace a top guy, you got to replace him with a top guy.
I guess what I'm getting at is I wanted you to kind of carry me through. This leads to ultimately Rick leaving the World Wrestling Federation and going back to WCW. So my question is, when the Warrior thing happens, had that happened before or after Rick had asked for his release? From what you recall.
The Warrior leaving?
Yeah.
No. Warrior leaving happened before Rick had asked for his release.
Okay, so this thing with Mr. Perfect is written to kind of cover up and continue
Warrior's
start a
exit.
storyline.
Yes.
And now once that feud is started, then Rick asks for his release.
Yeah, Rick asked for his release, I want to say sometime in January.
Okay. So okay.
Of the next year.
Well, he leaves in January, so
yeah.
I'll give it to him very quickly.
We did. Rick was unhappy, and Vince was of the opinion he didn't want unhappy people around him. And prior to that, Rick was battling vertigo and had some equilibrium issues that he had to deal with. So we didn't have the Ric Flair of old at that point, and he was battling through that, and we'd switch the title to Brett, and Rick had another opportunity, and Vince wasn't going to stand in his way and gave him his release. I remember the night at Survivor Series, at Monday Night Raw in the Manhattan Center.
Yeah.
The night that we had Perfect and Rick work a match. And I remember Rick calling Arn Anderson on the phone going, "Hey, you watching Raw? Yeah, watch this." And then went out and dropped the fall to Perfect and said, "I'm coming back." So it was pretty quick. It was pretty quick.
So they have a little bit of a run-in at Royal Rumble 93 and then go on to have that Lizard Leaf Town match you just alluded to on Raw, and then he's with the company. But that's not the only time that you guys kind of flirted with the idea of him being a part of the company, because when he was in his, I don't know, what would you call it, a Mexican standoff with Eric Bischoff?
Yeah, there was always talk back and forth, and Rick is one of those guys. He's always going to explore his options and see if the grass is actually greener on the other side. And he was looking for something else and wanted to see if there was any interest, testing the waters to see if there was any interest on the other side. And I think I would dare to say there was always interest in Rick. So you got a great performer and one of the biggest names in the business. Of course there's going to be interest.
He has a little bit of a situation. 97 is an interesting year for Rick. That year in the War Games, you could say they kind of killed the town with the Carolinas if you wanted to, when Kurt Hennig turns down his Horseman spot for a spot with the NWO and slams Flair's head in the cage. And so he takes some time off to do some surgeries there. And then in April of 98, he is in this Mexican standoff, I guess we'll call it, with Eric Bischoff. And he's off TV. But there's rumors and innuendo, and I want you to address this, that same month, in April of 1998, the WWF is running a pay-per-view called In Your House Unforgiven with the Greensboro Coliseum, which is obviously a site that was very synonymous with Ric Flair and Starrcade and Jim Crockett Promotions. And the rumors and innuendo would lead you to believe that you guys had worked something out, or at least talked about working something out, where you talk about a great world champion sitting ringside and go to interview that champion. Maybe it was just a great wrestling champion ringside, and you go to interview that champion, and instead of interviewing Ric Flair, you interview Reed Flair, and Rick is just seated next to him just to kind of stir up some controversy. Do I have that right? How did that come about? Whose idea was it? Why didn't it happen?
Well, the idea, I think, was probably floated out there by Rick himself, and he was looking to stir up as much controversy as he could. But we always had been friendly with Rick, and Vince was very careful at that time to navigate those waters with WCW and contract tampering and things of that nature. It was a messy issue. Rick was still under contract, and it was just messy. So, I think cooler heads prevailed, if you will.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen that. It would have been something at the time, but I get why it didn't happen. Of course, everybody remembers later that year, he being Rick, returned to Nitro to a thunderous ovation and confronted Eric Bischoff, and it was an interesting show for sure. A chill bump moment in watching wrestling history, at least for me. Time passes, they go out of business, and you find out that they have bought, that the WWF has bought WCW, and I think you're actually at the last Nitro, right?
I was.
So is that the first time you see Rick in a major way, in a formal capacity, I guess, since 1993?
Well, in a formal capacity, but I'd seen Rick through the years, whether it be at hotel bars or NATPE convention, the television conventions over the years, in passing, if you will. But I hadn't seen him in a long time, and it was great to see him. But walking in, and it was, as we were putting the last Nitro show together, one of the things that we really wanted to see was when you think of WCW and you think of the legacy of WCW, that legacy doesn't exist without Ric Flair.
Right.
And I dare say that legacy on the other side of that had to be Sting. And Rick hadn't worked in a while at that point. They had him doing crazy skits, and he was wrestling in his clothes and things like that. Just been doing a lot of goofy stuff. But we felt that that wasn't the way people wanted to remember Ric Flair and WCW. We just really fought for, let's have that last Ric Flair match be a Ric Flair match against a classic opponent in Sting. And pitched it, and the only request that Rick had was that he was self-conscious about his body because he hadn't taken his shirt off on TV and wrestled a match in so long.
Right.
He was just self-conscious about it and asked if he could wear a T-shirt. And we're like, we don't care. We just want Ric Flair in the ring. We want to see the Nature Boy Ric Flair that everybody remembers. We don't want to see the goof running around in his underwear and all that other crazy stuff they had him do.
So, did he just show up with a robe that night? Because he came to the ring in a robe. If he wasn't planning to wrestle,
we had let them know on the Saturday before, I believe,
to bring his stuff.
And he didn't. He didn't bring his stuff. And we found out that morning. And we had his stuff shipped in counter to counter. So somebody from the house took it to the airport, and then it flew down. Yes.
I got it. So after that ends, why is there no conversation, or was there conversation, about including Rick as part of the invasion angle? Because a lot of big guys weren't there, Ric Flair included. Even if he wasn't wrestling, he could have been one hell of a mouthpiece to represent WCW. Why do you think he wasn't involved in that?
Because of his contract with Time Warner. He wanted to get paid out. And I don't blame him for that. A lot of those guys did. And we weren't going to assume a lot of those high-dollar contracts from Time Warner. So Rick opted to wait his contract out, get paid from Time Warner. And he had worked hard for it, and he got it, and it allowed him to sit out and not have to work the grind. And when his contract was up, even then, he wasn't, I know this is hard to believe knowing Rick, but Rick wasn't that interested in the beginning to jump back into the rat race.
Wow.
And that took a little bit of convincing. And
so when does that start? He comes back in November of 2001. His last match was in March. So roughly 8 months. When do you guys start having a conversation about bringing him in?
Probably a few months after the fact. It was one of those situations that, Rick was out there, and we didn't have that nemesis for Vince, really, and we needed somebody. We were looking at the brand split, and we needed the anti-Vince authority figure, if you will. And his name came up. So we pursued it. And I dare say, Rick came back and hadn't missed a beat. And they loved him, man. They wanted him so bad, and to see him in that ring with Vince, you talk about goosebumps. That was, I think, of the Ric Flair moments, his retirement in Orlando at WrestleMania, and when Rick came back in Atlanta, because Rick was so self-conscious, and it's funny that sometimes how he doesn't hear what everybody else is hearing.
Right.
And he was unsure whether or not they would, I don't know if it was that they would remember him or that they would be happy to see him. And
he's always thought he wasn't necessarily a big star when he was with the WWF.
Yeah, he's wrong.
He didn't consider himself a big draw in California or New York or any of the major WWF markets at that time.
Right.
I think some of that changed in his mind, with his later WWF stuff, which I'm sure we'll cover. So he comes back, and you guys talk him into it. He has the big, I'm co-owner, I'm the consortium, and angle. And then, supposedly, if you believe Rick, the rumors and innuendo, as you like to say, he was not supposed to come back and wrestle.
He was not.
And after coming back in November, he's wrestling in January at the Royal Rumble in a street fight against Vince McMahon.
Yeah.
Carry me through how that comes about. What was he originally hired to be? Just an on-air television character?
An on-air character, and he was not.
Just TV.
TV. He was not going to wrestle. He was not going to be in the ring. And, a few months later, he's in the ring with the boss. But even that, that had the caveat. It's just going to be a street fight.
It's not a real match.
Yeah, this isn't a real match, man. You don't have to do all your signature stuff. This is a street fight with events. It's a special attraction.
Right.
It's a one-off. Well, next.
So, chat me up. In your opinion, do you think Rick was ever going to be satisfied with that Nitro match against Sting being his retirement match?
At the time, because I hadn't been around Rick on a regular basis, I didn't know. I really didn't know. And it was one of those things. He had a great career. It was Ric Flair, and what are we going to do now? And when he came back, like I said, the issue was, come back. We just want you as authority figure, and we don't see you in the ring at all. And then, the rest is kind of history. You can't deny it.
Famous little spot in that Royal Rumble match where there's a traditional camera used, and they take a picture of each other as they're brawling, and it's a camera that the Flair family was using. And years later, Rick had a copy of that sent to him by Vince, framed, and it was one of his more cool memories or pieces of memorabilia. Was Vince kind of known for doing stuff like that, something that he thought was a moment he shared with the talent, paying special attention to it, having something framed and shipped to him, or just something like a little token of appreciation of a memory or a moment in time?
Yeah, Vince is real good about that. If he hones in on one thing, he knows something means something to somebody. I remember, for example, the Rock being a big Willie Nelson fan and having a guitar, and we used it as a prop. And Rock's birthday was coming up, and Vince, how long did we have? We had not even, I don't even think we had a week. And Vince comes to me and says, I need a guitar signed by Willie Nelson for The Rock for his birthday. I'm like, okay. Thumbs up. Good for you. I'll get it for me. And I'm like, oh man, it was crazy, but we actually, Jerry Briscoe helped out tremendously in that regard, and we were able to get to Willie through Billy Gibbons with ZZ Top, and we're able to get a guitar, get it signed, and get it all taken care of. So to answer your question, yes, Vince does do that for people if he knows there's something special there, and it's a special moment. He'll memorialize it.
Going into the next kind of big show after that January pay-per-view match against Vince McMahon, he's with another big-time guy, WrestleMania 18 against The Undertaker in Toronto. How does this one come about? This is a stacked card. Flair's maybe not necessarily the first choice, I wouldn't imagine, to be with The Undertaker at this point. Or would he have been? How did that come about?
Ric Flair was Undertaker's choice. And Undertaker wanted to work with Flair.
Okay.
And Taker was still doing the American Badass gimmick at that point, and looking around at his opponents, who was there, he wanted to work with Flair. So that was Taker's doing, and that was Taker's choice. Pretty
interesting moment in the match. Arn Anderson slides in, gives a hell of a brain buster, or a spine buster rather, to The Undertaker. Obviously, Double A famous for that spine buster. When did you guys sign Arn?
We signed Arn on right when we bought WCW, right after that.
And so he had been with the company for a while, just producing television?
Right. We had Arn as one of our backstage producers, and actually Arn did color on the first WCW, the one and only.
The Tacoma.
The famous Booker T versus Buff Bagwell match in Tacoma, Washington. Arn was color commentator for that, but Arn was helping us behind the scenes as a producer.
And he's still doing that all these years later.
Yes, sir.
So let's kind of fast forward. Unforgiven in 2002, Triple H is in the main event for the world title, and during the match, Flair comes down and grabs the sledgehammer from Triple H and teases hitting him, and then ultimately sides with Triple H and starts attacking Triple H's opponent, and Flair turns heel in the process. So now he's sided with the top heel in the company, who's also the world champ. So this is the first official pairing of Triple H and Ric Flair. Do you remember how that comes about? From, if you believe, as you would call them, the rumors and innuendo, Triple H was involved, or at least had his hand in the creative process by this point. Would he have been a Horseman mark and a Flair mark himself and said, hey, let me do something with Rick, put Rick with me?
Hate that term, Mark. But yes, he was a huge Ric Flair fan, without a doubt.
You know what I mean?
You know. Yes, Hunter was a huge Flair fan, and it was a way to give more credibility, if you will, to Hunter.
Sure.
By putting him with Flair and having Flair sprinkle Ric Flair dust on Hunter and put the two of them together as old and new, and kind of endorse and give the blessing to Hunter as a champion. It was one of those deals, make Rick a manager of sort, give a little more color and pizzazz to Triple H, if you will.
Sure.
And throw him out there. But, it's funny as you talk, and obviously I haven't prepared for this nearly as much as you. It comes back to me, and every time I want to preface everything I say with, we didn't want Rick to work.
Right.
We had no intention of putting Rick back in the ring. And then all of these scenarios just come up and happen, and
it's just organic. It just happens.
It just kind of happened.
Well, so at what point did the thought process become, hey, it's not just going to be Rick and Triple H. We're going to make this into a faction. Was Triple H's idea all along to make this kind of like a new version of the Four Horsemen? That's at least the way it seems as a fan from the outside.
Yeah, somewhat. You've got the stalwart in Ric Flair. So I'm not going to call Rick old, but you had
the legend.
The legend. You've got the champion now. You've got the beast, the enforcer in Batista, and then you got the future in Randy Orton. And that's kind of how Evolution was looked at, and that's how we viewed it as a unit. And
that wasn't always the plan, because Jindrak was at least there for some of the promotional materials, the videos and stuff that were shot at first. Whose idea was Jindrak? Who soured on him? And why the shift to include Batista rather than Jindrak?
Well, Jindrak was new, and they shot some stuff at a gentleman's club with Jindrak, and they shot some stuff, with a helicopter and some other things with Jindrak. He was the original choice, and right about that same time, Batista's coming up, and it looked like, well, here we've got this other monster that we know has a big future. Do we put him into this group of workers? Because, again, you got Triple H, Randy Orton, Ric Flair. both guys, Jindrak and Batista, but I think there was a bigger upside with Dave Batista to go into Evolution, and the decision was made rather abruptly. Let's put Dave in there and go with it.
Let me ask why. I'm a big Batista fan, full disclosure, but let me ask why on that, because Jindrak is like 8 or 9 years younger than Batista, and it seems like Vince has always kind of skewed on the younger side. Why do you think he wouldn't have? Was it just a size thing? Batista was bigger?
No, it was probably a charisma thing. It was one of those intangible it things. There appeared less time would have to be invested in Batista because of his look, because of his charisma. So let's fast track him and put him with these guys and get him up to speed. I think it would have taken a lot more work to get Jindrak up to speed, and I dare say that I'm not sure that we would have had the same success with Jindrak. And it was also compatibility. It was, I hate to use the word clicked, but those four guys, being Batista, Flair, Hunter, and Orton, they clicked well. They fit.
They meshed, yeah. Was there any sort of concern that Batista couldn't be considered, in this top spot after debuting with a gimmick like Deacon Batista with Devon?
Yes.
Not trying to be
no, that's the reality of it, man. We put him out there on a collar and sleeveless shirts, collecting donations from the crowd.
And now he's with Ric Flair and Triple H. It seems a little like, they're going to buy this.
Well, the idea was to make as stark of a change as you possibly could, and that was a pretty stark change.
Oh, yeah, it was.
So
it was for sure. Do you know what, if any, I'm sure there's some. I just want you to kind of expound on what sort of influence Rick had in the careers of Randy Orton and Batista, because both of those guys were still trying to kind of make a name for themselves, and now they're obviously superstars. Batista doing stuff even outside of WWE, but some of that, how to be a star, and then just the mechanics, the inner workings of the wrestling business. In my head, Rick would have been a big asset for them, or am I way off base?
Can you imagine, as a quarterback, having a Roger Staubach or a Terry Bradshaw watch every single play you made and be able to critique and help you on every single play and every workout? That's what Ric Flair was. Here he was out in their matches at ringside,
right,
helping them, and he would pick apart and critique every single one of those guys every single night and help them with nuances and help them with details, and you should have done this here, you should have done that there, you did this really well, let's expound on that. So having that knowledge and also being at the ring with them during their matches and be able to call them out and legitimately tell them what to do next.
Right.
So, yeah, without a doubt, man, Rick, the influence that he had on them in the ring, it was little things like, wear a sport coat. Go get some stuff custom made. Look the part. Be the man. And there were those little nuanced things that Ric Flair always did that made him stand out head and shoulders above everybody else for so many years.
Right.
The other guys took for granted. They didn't do. When you put everybody and you line them up, and some guys may be wearing suits and sport coats and have Rolex watches and bleach their hair and so on and so forth. Flair's was tailor-made.
Yeah.
It fit perfectly. Rick's Rolex had a diamond bezel and sparkled.
Yeah.
Rick's hair, it wasn't one out of place.
Right.
Those were details that you guys either get or they don't. And I used to love it when you would look at the Horsemen sometimes and they would come out. Tully always dressed,
nice,
really nicely. But orange shit didn't fit. Holy shit didn't fit. Luger's didn't fit. And I get it, they're big guys, but Rick's was literally custom made from head to toe. And he instilled those things in Randy. He instilled that in Batista. And Hunter had already been emulating Rick for so many years behind the scenes and in front of the camera that those started to rub off, and those guys became bigger stars because of the way they presented themselves and carried themselves in and out of the ring.
Let's fast forward in this evolution talk. Rick actually gets a tag team title run, which a lot of people wouldn't have guessed at this, age of his career, stage of his career. Rick wouldn't be winning titles, but he did. He was the tag team champ with Batista, and they won that at Armageddon 03, and that was also the show where Randy Orton won the Intercontinental belt. So if you're keeping up, this stable, kind of Horseman-like, has all the belts here. Triple H is the world champ, having defeated Goldberg. Evolution, as they're called, Ric Flair and Batista are the tag champs, and Randy Orton is the Intercontinental champ. So these guys have all the belts. Was this another kind of nod to the Horsemen, do you think?
Sure. I mean, it was a formula that worked. It was put all the gold on the heels and have your top baby faces chasing them.
Yeah.
So it was a formula that worked.
Eventually, the decision is made to have Benoit lose the belt to Randy Orton at SummerSlam, and Orton becomes the youngest champ ever, and then he is promptly kicked out of the group by Triple H, and the group starts to kind of break up, so to speak. Eventually, let's fast forward, since this is the Ric Flair show, you guys have what many have called a night in Greenville. This is 2003. This would come on the heels of a pay-per-view match with Kevin Nash and Triple H. And on this match, in storyline, there's some sort of situation where the general manager is requiring that Triple H defend the belt. I'm doing all this from memory. I hope I'm getting it right. But he's required to defend the belt, and he has to defend it against a former world champion. And Triple H gets to pick the champ. So he picks Ric Flair. And everyone kind of assumes, oh, well, it's his buddy. He's just going to lay down. And more as we see kind of the backstage vignettes happen, we start to realize, wait a minute, Flair's going to take this serious. And he cuts one hell of a promo, one of his best of his career at that phase. And he's wearing a purple robe in the back. And he says, I want to see you at your best. I want the game. I want to know that I can still do it. And so they go out and have a really phenomenal match. And me, as a fan, I had suspended disbelief. I thought, holy shit, they're really going to do this. They're going to give him one more title run. Ultimately, of course, Triple H wins. But then afterwards, and they showed this on one of the Flair DVDs, the entire locker room comes out, empties, celebrates with some beer, hoists Flair up on their shoulders. It's a big celebration. I guess my question is, whose idea was this angle and this match? When did Rick know? Because he's all over this show. And was there ever any real consideration of giving him a title run at that stage of his career?
I want to say it was Michael Hayes' idea. And I produced that interview you talk about.
I love it.
And it was one of those situations where we thought about it from the standpoint of what's logical.
Right.
What makes sense? And the philosophy I always say, what if? And we played this scenario out, and after a while, it was very difficult to poke holes in it. And as you just said, I think that the majority of the people that were watching were saying, oh my God, they're going to drop the title to Rick. They're going to switch the title. And there were some people that were in that camp to switch the title that night. I was in the camp of, that's what everybody's thinking. Let's don't do it. Because reality-based, when you look at the two, to me it was more reality-based for Hunter to beat him. But also at the same time, reality-based, it was so great to see Ric Flair in the ring competing at that level against the guy that was the best in the business at that time, in Triple H, for the championship. And every single person in the arena, and I dare say everybody watching at home, was able to suspend their disbelief and go, damn it, are they really going to do it? And you felt that, and there was that emotion. And at the end of it, if you thought, you know what, really Triple H is the better guy, and he should, you wanted him to win. Even if you went into it in the beginning going, forget it, this is ridiculous. By the end of that match,
you were believing.
You were believing, and you were rooting for him.
Absolutely.
And you wanted so badly. I'm watching it at the gorilla position, and I'm sitting there looking, and of course, Michael Hayes, yep, told you. And we're sitting there going, shoot, man, maybe
we should have did it.
Well, God, what if we did it?
Was there any consideration right there to getting in the ref's headset and doing it right there?
No, because we had too many plans going forward, and we, it just was one of those deals. This beautiful moment, and you look through Ric's career, there were so many of those beautiful moments.
There really were.
But that was one. When you first started talking about this, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, where the hell is he going? When you got into it, oh yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that whole night of placing the doubt and the talking down to Ric and building him up. And we actually had to build Ric up to that point all night long. And I had a way of producing some guys, Ric being one of them, Big Show being another one, where I would get in their heads with every negative thing that was ever said to them in real life, to get them to fire back.
Give me an example.
Just, you're a loser. You're an old man. You can't do this anymore. Nobody wants to see an old man out there in trunks compete because they know, look at this stud. He's bigger. He's stronger. He's faster. He's better. You might have been able to hang 20 years ago, but today, it's not your ring anymore. And he would sit there and listen to this and go, oh, man, I don't even know why the hell we're doing this. Nobody's going to believe this. How the hell can anybody believe Ric Flair? I mean, maybe back in WCW, but not here. Not on the show. I don't know if you got it anymore. And that's really how we came up with this.
And he got fired up.
And he got fired up.
A tremendous promo.
Because all of a sudden, all the negativity of things that people had said and whispered behind his back, that drove him to say, oh yeah? Watch this. He delivered in the promo, he delivered in the ring, and that was a beautiful moment to me where you sat there and went, yeah. Because I come from that place. I would always listen to the negativity in my career drove me to succeed and flip the middle finger at everybody who said I couldn't do it.
Right.
And Ric was the same way, and being able to pump him up for that. And I did it slowly because I didn't want that attitude at the beginning of the night. At the beginning of the night, I wanted doubt.
Right.
And he gave it. I mean, and you look at throughout that series, and you see Ric growing more confident, more questioning. Well, maybe he's right. Or, well, wait a minute. No, I still got it. Do you? What happens when the bell rings, Ric? I mean, are you really going to be able to take that bump? He not only took it, he took it better than anybody else. And did it all. And proved that, I used to love to tell him when he'd come in and go, hey, you're Ric Flair. Don't forget that.
It's worth watching if you're listening and you've never actually seen this. I can't recommend it enough. It's May 19th, 2003 is that date of Raw. It is on the network. It's also on YouTube. If you're not a network subscriber, it's out there. And it's worth checking out for sure. We don't have enough time to go through all things Ric Flair in the WWF. I'd really like to, at another time, kind of continue this. But I do want to finish 2003. We kind of jumped around and talked a little bit about Evolution and how that ended. Of course, that was not in 03. But we're just, bouncing around talking about Ric Flair on a very special edition of the Ric Flair Show. But before I let you go, Bruce, I can't help but wonder, WrestleMania 20 is a topic that a lot of people are talking about right now because that was the source of the original Goldberg-Brock Lesnar match, and we're going to see that rematch at Survivor Series this weekend. But Rick was on this show and had kind of an interesting situation, and I've always wanted to know how this comes about. Evolution versus the Rock and Sock connection. So Mick Foley had been retired. The Rock's been off making movies, but they're going to come back now and take on a three-man team of Randy Orton, Batista, and Ric Flair. Can you kind of carry us through how this gets put together and whose idea this is? Because the Rock and Sock connection, while it was a big thing, it didn't seem likely that these guys would ever be here again. Foley has in later years said that he wasn't really tickled with this performance, and backstage, Austin told him that he dropped the ball in this match. What did you think of the match? Whose idea was it? Kind of talk to us about WrestleMania 20.
Well, it was looking for something for Rock to do, and basically it was looking for something for all those guys to do that would be big, and getting Rock involved in it, and Mick, and it was all big players involved in that match. So it was a situation where, let's throw them all into one match, and it didn't work. It just didn't work.
What didn't you like about it?
You had 5 really strong personalities involved in that thing, and it's hard to put the spotlight on anyone, and it just didn't work. It just didn't mesh for that night. But you look at the stuff Foley did with Orton, you look at the stuff Foley did with Flair, and all those guys individually, you would have thought that this is going to be great. It's going to be entertaining as hell. It was just one of those things. It just didn't work. It just didn't work. And then you fast forward a little bit, and you look at the short time, when Rick and Roddy Piper were tag team champions. And it was kind of like we called it the Golden Girls Tour. I could get away with it because I was friends with with Roddy and Rick. But it was like a couple of old ladies in there sometimes as they were getting ready. But to see Flair and Piper together at that period in their career, to me, from a friend standpoint, I loved it. It was entertaining as hell to me. And they were out there every single night teaching, some of the younger kids how you can still do it. And they had a lot of fun doing it, and it was crazy. I remember being overseas and Piper having this humongous bruise, for lack of a better term, where his liver should have been, and Rick's knee all blown up, and and both guys holding themselves together with tape, but they kept going, and it was a testament to who the hell they were. And looking at, like I said before, and we can end on this, is Rick's retirement in Orlando. I cried. Man, I think we were 10 minutes into the match, and I was crying like a baby.
Who's obviously had a really long run here, and Rick actually, this is going to annoy a lot of listeners, I'm sure, but Rick credits a lot of his fame and notoriety and success he has on the appearance circuit now to this run with the WWE, more so than any of the other stuff, because he had a bigger audience watching him.
Right.
So I don't think a lot of people expected him to be around as long as he did, but it's kind of one of those things where you just don't want it to end. And I'm curious, you were in creative meetings at the time, whose idea was, all right, we're writing him off TV?
That was Vince's.
And so he had just grown tired of it, or he felt he was too old, or he didn't like his cosmetic look?
Vince wanted Rick to go out on top.
Okay.
And felt that Rick was at that point where it was time to, if he went on any longer, that people would start looking at him as just holding on too long.
Right.
And Rick was acceptable to the idea at first, and it was a situation where Vince was looking at it and trying to help Rick and protect Rick from himself and say, hey, man, let's go out on top and retire, put you in the Hall of Fame where you belong, and we'll find something else for you to do as a goodwill ambassador, and go out on top, because that's the way that Ric Flair should go out. And so we started the plan.
What did you think of the execution of the build-up for it with the old Yeller promos and stuff like that?
I loved it, because it's what I think a lot of people were thinking. And as I said, they would say a lot of that stuff under their breath and behind his back. So it was real life. Here's one of the greatest of all time, reaching the end of his career. And here's the younger guy that emulated him his entire career that's got to do the old Yeller and take him out behind the barn and shoot him, because he couldn't sacrifice his own career. And it was real life. I mean, it happens in jobs. You talk about Dusty Rhodes and the Hard Time promos. You work at the same job for 30 years and you get a gold watch and you're kicked to the curb.
Right.
And that was real life, and it was an opportunity for Rick to go out on top and to go out by one of the best of all time in Shawn Michaels.
No, he certainly was. It was a fitting finish, maybe the finest finish, ever in wrestling. I can't think of a better retirement in wrestling. Can you? No,
I really can't.
Of his WWF run, since we're kind of just going to leave this to WWF, we'll talk about him in TNA another time, I'm sure. But do you have any matches that you would recommend that you would think people should go check out?
Well, without a doubt, definitely the last one was Shawn, and you brought it up. You want to talk about emotion and working a crowd and building a story. That Triple H match tells a simple story, and it builds. And by the end of that match, if you weren't rooting for him at the beginning, I think everybody was rooting for him at the end. And Rick told great stories in the ring. That's what it's all about.
As a fan, let me recommend a couple other ones. I really enjoyed his 2005 feud with Triple H. Some phenomenal promos there. Maybe my favorite promo ever was from October of that year on Raw. But they had two matches in October of 2005 at Taboo Tuesday in a cage match. Survivor Series 2005 with Triple H in a last man standing match. Those matches were just phenomenal. If you're just in the mood for another bloody cage match with Ric Flair from this era, the year before at Taboo Tuesday, he took on Randy Orton.
Great match.
You like that one best?
Yes.
You liked it better than the Triple H ones?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because it was Rick taking Randy to school.
Okay. I'm not mad at it. I also enjoyed, and I might be in the minority on this, what did you think of the work he did with Mick Foley in the WWF? I know they tried to recreate some of that in TNA, but man, they were really getting after each other in the WWF, and it included Mick doing some hardcore match stuff, thumbtacks and barbed wire baseball bats and all that with Ric Flair that we never thought we would see. What was your take on all that?
It was real emotion, and the two felt very strongly about one another. I'm not going to say they were the best of friends. So it was real. It was real emotion, and that always works. It always works. Because if the competitors believe it, if the performers believe it, the audience will believe it.
It is worth checking out. They did a 2 out of 3 falls match. Mick Foley, and Ric Flair at Vengeance 2006. If you'd like to go out of your way to check that out. Anything else we want to mention about Ric Flair's run in the WWF? It seems like we could just go on and on and on. But this is the Ric Flair show, and we're trying to just kind of fill in for the champ while he's away. If you want to continue that Mick Foley, Ric Flair stuff, you can see more of that. SummerSlam 2006, they have an I Quit match. These guys were obviously maybe a little older than they could have put on a match like this in WCW, but still, the emotion of it, like you said, resonated. Anything else worth checking out or mentioning in the Ric Flair era of the WWF?
No, not off the top of my head. It's just after 30-plus years hanging with Rick, it's been a hell of a ride, and we've had a lot of fun over the years, and it's been crazy.
Do you have a fun Ric Flair travel story you can share with us? Once upon a time, you've told us the Vegas story when we've done a show together with Rick in the past about how you guys were with competing companies, but that didn't keep you from having one hell of a time.
Yes, we did.
Everywhere Rick goes, he has a good time. Do you have any other fun stories you could mention?
No, I remember the first time I ever gave Rick a ride was in Houston, Texas, and he was staying out at the Ramada Inn out at Hobby Airport. That hotel's not even there anymore. And as we were driving to the airport, he says, man, he goes, do you guys have this thing? It's called Popeye's Fried Chicken here. And I said, Popeye's? Hell yeah. He says, yo, man, he goes, I haven't eaten it. Any way we could stop and get something to eat? I said, sure. So we go through the Popeye's drive-thru, and we get there. He orders 20 spicy chicken breasts.
20?
20. And 20 jalapenos.
20 chicken breasts.
20 spicy chicken breasts and 20 jalapenos. And we get back, and I'm thinking, man, he's having a party. And he's like, hey, Bruce, thank you. I'm just beat. And I said, really? You're not going to have a beer? And we drank 2 beers in the hotel bar. And I keep waiting for him to break out that damn chicken. And he kept it in the bag and says, man, I'm going to go to bed. I'm dead, and I got to eat my chicken. That son of a bitch went to his room, 20 chicken breasts and 20 jalapenos.
There's no chance he ate all that.
He probably pulled the skin off of it.
Oh, for sure.
And ate that with all the jalapenos. And if Jim Cornette had been within a 100-mile radius, Corny probably would have come behind him and eaten all the skin.
Why
the hell are you leaving all the goddamn good skin there? That's the best part of the chicken. Corny used to get hot when guys would take the skin off the chicken. He'd go behind him and eat just the chicken skins.
Well, we get hot at each other quite a bit, usually on Fridays. Tell everybody.
How come you were so much nicer to me on the Ric Flair show, but in 2 days you're going to beat me up and brutalize me on Something to Wrestle with Bruce Prichard? It drops at noon on Fridays.
It's I don't know. It's a different format. Maybe we'll go with that.
Well, we could go with that. I mean, I wish I had a T-shirt for that, but you can get my T-shirts at ProWrestlingTees.com/Bruce Prichard. They also have Ric Flair shirts at Pro Wrestling Tees as well.
They do. You can pick up some official Ric Flair show shirts or some Bruce Prichard shirts. And, man, I appreciate you kind of jumping in here and tag teaming the Ric Flair show with me this week while Rick is busy shooting a commercial that everybody's going to see very soon. Sorry for a little bit of an audible, but we did try to make it as Ric Flair-centric as possible. All about Ric Flair working with Vince McMahon this week, but we're not done. Even though Rick's away, we're still going to do This Week in History. We're going to do Ask Naitch, and we're going to do Voicemail of the Week. Stay tuned. More on The Ric Flair Show.
This week on MLWRadio.com. Hulk Hogan speaks candidly about his WWE status, Bill Goldberg, and Donald Trump with Eric Bischoff's Bischoff on Wrestling. Join your buddies over at Marty and Sarah Love Wrestling as they play F, Marry, Kill with Colt Cabana. On the flagship show, Naitch's partner in crime, Conrad Thompson, joins Court and MSL in the hot seat on MLW Radio, talking Joey Styles being fired this past weekend for a political joke. NXT soft ticket sales for tonight's show in New York City, Survivor Series, and more. Then, pull up to Jim Cornette's drive-thru on this premium-only podcast. This week, Corny talks Rowdy Roddy Piper versus Jerry the King Lawler at the 1994 King of the Ring. On Friday, enjoy the sweet and savory southern sounds of Bruce Prichard with Conrad Thompson with Something to Wrestle with Vader as they explore his WWF run. Are you with me? Plus much more. The world of MLW Radio never stops. Go to MLWRadio.com and binge on Pro Wrestling Talk now. You're listening to The Ric Flair Show.
Is there anything I need to know about you?
You're talking to the Rolex wearing, diamond ring wearing, kiss stealing, woo, wheeling dealing, limousine riding, jet flying, son of a gun, and I'm having a hard time holding these alligators down. Woo, woo!
And now, more Ric Flair.
It's time for This Week in History on the Ric Flair Show. Woo! Brought to you by MidAtlanticGateway.com.
Dick Bourne and David Chappell are celebrating the memories of Jim Crockett Promotions every day at MidAtlanticGateway.com.
I don't want your belt, that gold belt. I don't want your family. I don't want your money. I want something that's more valuable than that ever will be. I want your pride.
Because we're not talking about championship belts. We're not talking about women or cars. We're talking about something that both you and I have held higher than anything else, and held first and foremost in our two careers. And that's pride, that's integrity, and that's guts.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the RPI Fieldhouse in beautiful Troy, New York. And the fans here are ready for Clash of Champions 9. Ladies and gentlemen, when we come back, Terry Funk, Ric Flair, the final chapter with I Quit Rules. Don't go away. We'll be right back on TBS.
And Flair now moving like a man with just a crazed inspiration.
Funk's chest is a battered red and blue. The contusions are quite obvious. There it is! There it is! He's got the figure 4!
That puts pressure on 5 different points. The pain is intense.
Never.
He's got the figure 4. How much?
Oh, God, never. Never.
You can hear him say never.
Yeah, and we're liable to hear a leg snap, too.
He's got that thing locked completely in. He's got it deep in there. Gordon, have you ever seen anybody last this long in a figure 4?
It can be reversed. It can be reversed. But
Yes, I quit.
He said it.
He said it. I can't believe it. Gary Hart is livid, but Ric Flair has won it.
Gary Hart just can't believe what's happened. He did it.
All right, Bruce. So this week in history, I know that you are a wrestling historian. You'll appreciate this. November 15th, 1989, the RPI Fieldhouse, Troy, New York, Clash of the Champions 9, the New York Knockout. This is, without a doubt, one of Ric's most famous matches. And they say one of his best years in business, 1989. He started the year off with a trilogy with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. And in their final match of that series in Nashville, Terry Funk was ringside as a judge. And afterwards, he attacked Ric, and that set up a feud that ran about 6 weeks. So we get Terry Funk and Ric Flair here now in the culmination of this feud in an I Quit match. Did you remember seeing this match? I'm sure even though you weren't working for the company, being an old-timer and appreciating old-timers, you love you some Terry Funk.
Oh, without a doubt. I remember that pile driver that Terry gave Flair
as in Nashville,
on the table in Nashville. I sure do, man. That was absolutely brutal. And just anytime you have an opportunity to watch Terry Funk in the ring, it's great. So, and he and Ric had some terrific matches, and that being one of them.
Pretty memorable feud here because it started with a pile driver through a table, or they tried to go through the table, at the aforementioned show with Ricky Steamboat in the main event against Ric Flair. That was in Nashville in 1989, February, I believe. And then at some point, they do the plastic bag over the head, where Terry Funk put that over Flair's head. Do you remember seeing that? And what was the reaction from the WWF side when you realized, oh gosh, they're putting bags over people's heads?
Yeah, we realized it after the fact. That was at a time when everything was being analyzed almost like it is today.
Yeah.
But it was, my opinion, and I think everybody else's opinion, it was in poor taste and pretty edgy for the time, and we probably helped nudge that along as far as the poor taste and get them in a little bit of trouble. So,
well, a phenomenal match here. If you haven't seen it, go out of your way to check it out. Clash of the Champions 9, the New York Knockout, towards the end of the match, and there's some innovative stuff in here. The match still stands up now. Brutal chops with one another, brawling outside the ring, a suplex on the apron. You know, this is way before Sami Zayn was wrestling, guys. People did this once upon a time before.
Get out of here.
Phenomenal match. Ultimately, Terry Funk yells, "I quit." Tommy Young is the referee. Gary Hart is a guy we don't talk about much these days. He was managing against Ric Flair in the corner of Terry Funk. Tell us a good Gary Hart story. You've probably got one.
One of the greatest managers of all time, and Gary was one of the first guys as a kid, when I say as a kid, as a teenager in the business, when Gary would come to town in Houston and he would ask me my thoughts on different things, and was very free back and forth, and would actually talk to me about the inner workings of the business. But this crazy story, I was 16 years old, and every Friday we had a show in Houston, and Gary Hart was the booker for the Dallas territory where Fritz von Erich was the boss. And Gary and Bronco Lubitsch, who was the referee, would come to town, and they would meet with Paul Bosch before that night's matches.
Right.
And I worked in the ticket office, and I would go get the guys lunch and bring them coffee and bring them drinks and what have you. And one time I walk in, and there's Paul Bosch and Gary Hart and Bronco Lubitsch, and they have a ring on the desk, which was a ring that Paul had like a piece of art. It was a wrestling ring, and it had two clay ceramic wrestlers in the middle of it. And Gary has one of the guys like tied up in the ropes and is showing how, okay, he'll have his leg tied up in the rope like this. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, this is how they do it? And thinking, my whole world's been shattered here. They're planning this out in a toy ring. And it was crazy. Years later, we had bigger rings to do it in. Yeah, it was crazy. But Gary, probably one of the most underrated and best managers in the business.
This was a comeback for Terry and his introduction for a lot of younger fans. Did you expect him to do this well on this run after being away for Hollywood for a bit? I mean, obviously his retirements, a number of retirements, is famous at this point, but did you think he'd do as well in '89 as he did?
Yeah, he's Terry Funk.
All right. I'm not mad at it. Do you remember this match specifically?
I remember the match. I don't remember that much of it, but I definitely remember the match.
Why do you think fans remember it so well?
Because it's Terry Funk.
There you go. I'm not mad at it. Check it out. New York Knockout. Clash of the Champions 9. This week in history. It doesn't seem like it was 27 years ago.
Wow.
Right? Yeah,
it's crazy.
27 years ago.
Hashtag Ask Naitch could be brought to you by you. If you'd like to promote your company on The Ric Flair Show, have the Nature Boy endorse your product, or even appear on the show to tell hundreds of thousands of loyal listeners about your service, just email ads@ricflairshow.com. That's ads@ricflairshow.com. If you'd like to ask Rick a question, just tweet using hashtag Ask Naitch, and we could ask your question next week on the show.
Okay, Bruce, this is called Ask Naitch, but we're going to pretend it's hashtag Ask Bruce, because this is kind of topical to you. This week's question comes to us from Sean ADT on Twitter. When Rick joined the WWF originally in 1991, was there ever any talk of forming the Four Horsemen? Hashtag Ask Naitch. I know you weren't there when he came in 91, but do you remember ever hearing any rumors or innuendo about, hey, let's try to put the band together, or maybe recreate the Horsemen in that era? Of course, we talked extensively earlier about how eventually Evolution comes around, but in the first run of his, Do you think that was ever a consideration? Would Vince have ever went for it? He kind of shied away from everybody else's ideas,
Nope.
so it seemed. No.
Wouldn't have done it. No. He was looking to make Ric Flair a singular star. Felt by having multiple guys at that time, and especially trying to introduce someone new, that it worked against that.
Do you think if circumstances were different, Tully Blanchard could have been a bigger deal with you guys in the WWF?
As a single star?
Yeah.
I don't know during that time, because it was a big man era.
He knew how to get
at
heat,
that time.
though.
Oh, without a doubt. He knows how to get heat in and out of the ring. And, but Tully was a working machine.
Yeah.
But Vince, the New York, not just Vince, the New York mindset was always had the big, huge heels.
Right.
And
so he would have needed to be a babyface, and it wouldn't have been as effective.
Yeah, and Tully was a smaller heel, a heat-seeking missile, and he was one of those working heels. I do believe, had he been given the opportunity,
he'd have succeeded.
He would have succeeded, yes, because he's a talented son of a gun. You can't take that away from him.
What could have been. Why do you think, since I got you, I don't know when we'll talk about this again. Everybody who listens to our other show just popped for that.
Yes.
Why didn't Arn and Tully have more of a sustained run and more success in the WWF? Obviously, they had a tag run that did okay and blah, blah, blah. But
they had a good run.
Could have been better.
Well, I thought it was good.
Okay.
Now we're into something to wrestle with.
We will. Yeah. More of us are.
Now you're starting to be mean to me again.
Okay. Well,
see, folks, he can be nice on the Ric Flair show, but
it's possible. It's possible. It's also possible to have fun with this week's voicemail of the week, which I can't believe it. On the format we worked out for the show, it's a topic you also know about.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Roger. Ready to move out.
Voicemail of the week is brought to you by lootcrate.com/Flair. And use promo code Flair to save another $3 off an already incredible value. Over $60 worth of WWE swag for less than $20 at lootcrate.com/Flair. If you'd like to be next week's voicemail of the week, just call the Ric Flair Show hotline, 844-RIC-SHOW. Leave your name, city you're from, and your hot take. If you've got what it takes to style and profile on the show, call now. Toll free, 844-RIC-SHOW. Now, here's this week's voicemail of the week.
Hello, Rick and Conrad. This is Jeff from Franklin, Vermont. I'd love to hear some stories about the trip Rick took to Studio 54 with Dusty and Magnum in 1985.
All right, man. This week's voicemail of the week is about Studio 54. I didn't hear this from Rick, but apparently, once upon a time, Dusty Rhodes, Magnum TA, and Ric Flair all at Studio 54. Have you heard this story? I know you spent quite a bit of time at Studio 54 and hanging out with Heyman. And do you have any good Studio 54 memories with any of the boys that you can share on air in public, if you will?
Actually, I don't, because Studio 54 was before my time with Heyman. I hung out at the China Club with Heyman. But I know the story you're talking about. Paul Heyman did a lot of the marketing and did a lot of things with them, and had this award night or something like that where he honored a bunch of the guys. And I do remember that from the magazines. And
you know what's interesting is I was with Rick in SummerSlam. I guess it was SummerSlam last year, not this year. And Heyman had just recently discovered a whole box of invitations for that particular event, which was the first ever Paul Heyman promoted event. It was a 54 invite. And they were recognizing Ric Flair. Wow. He found a whole box of the originals. So maybe one day Heyman will sign some and Flair will sign some, and we'll have some limited edition ones. But this was a limited edition version of the Ric Flair show. Ric Flair out this week filming a commercial. We still want to get you guys a Ric Flair show, so we tried to make it as Ric Flair-centric as we could. The other voice you hear is the man behind Something to Wrestle With, and it airs every Friday at noon Eastern. Go ahead and throw it in your Google machine. Throw him a subscribe. You can follow him on Twitter at Bruce Prichard. His podcast is at Prichard Show. I pull double duty here on MLW, and I co-host that show as well. I'm on Twitter at Hey It's Conrad. The man who didn't take the week off, Mr. Jerome Fisher, he's with us, and making us sound good. He is at Jerome Fisher VO. Of course, our friends over at the Mid-Atlantic Gateway did a lot of research for This Week in History. Follow them on Twitter at MA Gateway. And our title sponsor this week couldn't be beat. It's at Loot Crate. Go ahead and hit that up right now, lootcrate.com/Flair, and be sure to enter promo code Flair, and you're going to get an incredible value. It's $3 off, and it's under $20. So you're getting over $60 worth of swag for under $20 and an extra $3 off. Just go to lootcrate.com/Flair and enter promo code Flair to get all kinds of WWE swag you can't get anywhere else. Anything else we need to promote for you?
I think we hit it all.
Well, it's the Ric Flair show, but Bruce Prichard is on it. Is that a rib?
That's not a rib.
And it's not a rib that you should go check out his t-shirts, ProWrestlingTees.com/Bruce Prichard. Don't put a T in his name. Put one on your back. And we'll be back next week. And our guest of honor, if you've hung around this long, I've got a surprise for you. Magnum TA on the Ric Flair show.
And listen to my show this Friday, and we got a big announcement to make as well.
I'm trying to put over Ric Flair's show with Magnum next week.
Yeah,
You're stealing the thunder.
But on Friday, that happens before next week.
Okay. Listen to Friday Something to Wrestle With, all about Vader. In the beginning of the show, there will be a huge announcement that is regarding Bruce Prichard. If you're listening to the Ric Flair show for, Ric Flair, next week, Magnum TA, Jim Crockett Promotions, what happened when it was a ride for the gold, September 85. We're going to get into it. What a time to be alive. Next week on the Ric Flair show. Magnum TA. We'll see you then.
This is the MLW Radio Network.
eBay has huge savings on top tech brands for this Black Friday.
Right, so the plan is to start queuing at the electrical store at the crack of dawn.
HD TVs and games consoles? Click.
Then I'll run across the high street to the phone shop.
Smartphones and tablets? Click.
Then jump the barrier by the alleyway to get to the camera shop.
First aid kits? Click. Grab a bargain on lots of the latest tech products and more. Just click this Black Friday on eBay. The ultimate beat the crowds on Black Friday shop.